And we are back again. Welcome into the Dynasty After Party. I am Michael Sicoli, joined here by Joel Wirth, as always. How are you today, Joel?
Good. I think we started the countdown last week at 11 weeks, 10 weeks from the season, and
10 weeks.
6 weeks from the Fantasy Football Expo right here in beautiful Canton. You get plugged to Bob Lung and his awesome event. So we're getting there. We're getting
Incredible
close.
event.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wish I could be there this year. I was there last year. It was just a ton of fun. So anybody with any
100%.
slight interest, definitely give it a go. And I spent 3 hours in the Hall of Fame just walking around. My feet hurt so much last year. But we're talking about other Hall of Fame type of stuff on this show because it's Dynasty Fantasy Football, so it's Hall of Fame content coming on over here. We're going to continue the Look Inside series that we got going. We're going to be talking about the Commanders, the Steelers, and the Detroit Lions today before talking about a few Dynasty trades. But before we get into that, I just want to make sure you know where to follow all of us. Obviously, this is brought to you by Club Fantasy, so be sure to follow them on Twitter at Club Fantasy FFL, and obviously check out the website where all these amazing articles are put up at clubfantasyffl.com. You can follow myself at Michael _ Sicoli on Twitter. Follow Joel here at the Joel Wirth. So, without further ado, let's jump into the party favor of the top of the show here. The top of the show. Keep trade cut, Joel. That's what I want to get your opinion on here. Superflex, tight end premium, Chris Godwin, Kirk Cousins, Dallas Goedert. Keep trade cut.
Yeah, so we normally do like news of the week here, but we're kind of in the doldrums.
There's
really no news,
man. It's July. Like, this is the last month without football until next March, but nothing's happening really. At least on the offensive side of the ball that we talk about. I could ask you about Juwan Bentley, and his extension if you want me to, but I figured we're talking about value here in Dynasty Fantasy Football, and ultimately we're about sizing them up to each other.
Yeah, so if we're talking Superflex, I think Cousins is still valuable enough. His future is uncertain, but we know he's going to produce well this year, so he would be kind of my default number one. Half tight end premium kind of isn't really enough to put Goddard above Godwin, so I'd lean Godwin second and Goddard third.
I think I'd agree. The only exception I would have, I would probably take Goddard over Godwin. As much as I like Godwin, I find that I'm a little bit higher on him than consensus right now. I think everyone's a little bit too low on someone who still has plenty of prime years ahead of him at a very, very high talent margin. And I also think the Bucs are going to be in a bad enough position to get it into that type of are going to get that next quarterback after Baker Mayfield, because I'll tell you right now, it's not going to go too well. We have a comment thrown in here by MF's Dice Dealer about the gambling suspensions and IDP. We're talking offense on this show mainly, but the gambling suspensions, those are mainly based around players that fringe roster players at best. I mean, Isaiah Rodgers, right, is the most prominent of the bunch. He's a kick returner at best, and that was really only because Nyheim Hines got himself sent to Buffalo. So if we are talking IDP, and Joel, I don't know if you have any other opinions, anybody that has been suspended so far, with the exception of Jameson Williams, has really been off the radar for fantasy football. Right?
Yeah, I think the good news is that we don't have to talk about gambling suspensions, right? There's really nothing kind of dynasty relevant or even really fantasy relevant about them to this point, other than Jameson Williams' 6-week suspension. We kind of got the indication this week that this is kind of the end of the expected suspension. So hopefully nothing else crops up between now and at least the end of the season. So.
Yeah, and if it does, we're going to be here every single Sunday to talk about it. When the season starts, we'll talk about that, about whether that's going to be a different day. But anyway, let's jump into the main content, the main meat of the show this week, the Look Inside series. Let's talk about the Washington Commanders. And I know you have quite a lot to say, Joel, because you wrote the book on it this week. Antonio Gibson was the player you wanted to highlight. Again, you can follow Joel here at the Joel Wirth, because he puts out some amazing fantasy content. So tell me, what should I be thinking about Antonio Gibson, the guy that is the perennial Christian McCaffrey breakout?
Yeah, so I think the whole team really could have been the focus of the Look Inside, just because there's a lot going on, right?
A lot of questions.
You got a new ownership group coming in. You've got a new offensive coordinator. I made the point in the article that that's probably the biggest coaching upgrade. I mean, obviously the Colts going from Jeff Saturday to Shane Steichen is almost indefinable mathematically because Saturday was so bad. But going from Scott Turner to Eric Bieniemy is a big deal, right? Because Scott Turner was the definition of a nepotism hire. He's only got a job because of his dad. He's really never done anything to make himself, be considered as a legitimate coordinator at this level. He did, if he was that good, he would have found a job when they got rid of him. So Eric Bieniemy's been working with Andy Reid for like 9 years, and like Andy Reid legitimately deserves to be in the discussion with Belichick for like best coach of all time, right? He's getting there. So, I mean, he had a lot of Super Bowl appearances or a lot of championship games and Super Bowls in Philadelphia. He's doing the same thing in Kansas City. He's kind of a playoff savant, so he really deserves to be in that discussion. You can't have worked with someone that long without some of those positive attributes rubbing off. Bieniemy's been kind of a perpetual head coaching bridesmaid, but now he's got a job. And there's a lot of people saying that he should be the head coach there instead of Rivera. So I like Ron Rivera. Yeah, I kind of hope good things for him. He seems like a really good guy. Obviously, cancer survivor and all that. He's someone you kind of wish to do well. But he's absolutely coaching for his job this year with the new ownership group. He's going to have pressure from underneath. So I think this is going to be a very different looking team. And if we look back, and we got to remember that this team's been kind of an also-ran for so long that if you remember going back to last year, they had those back-to-back games with the Giants split up between their bye week. They had the terrible offensive penalty on Terry McLaurin, illegal motion penalty on Terry McLaurin that wiped out a touchdown and literally cost them the game. If they won that game, they probably would have made the playoffs instead of the Giants last year. So this was a team that was very close, and they kind of fell apart. After that game, they lost a bad game to Cleveland when Carson Wentz just kind of, I think, did Heineke get hurt or something, and Carson Wentz had to come in. That game was
they found the end of the rope. They hit the end of the trails. There's no more railroad for the train to keep going.
But this was a legitimate playoff contending team. So if not for, like one bad call literally probably cost them a chance at the playoffs. So this isn't a team that's that far away, right? So I think that coordinator upgrade is a big deal because I've kind of been, you've seen me kind of on the preview shows last year, I was kind of ranting on how they misused Antonio Gibson. And I think we're going to see the kind of Bieniemy kind of go out of his way to get him the ball in space where he can make a difference, kind of not force him into things he's not great at. You're bitching and moaning about, he fumbles too much. He's not a great between the tackles runner. Well, let's use him in the way that he's good. So we know he's good because he's had, double-digit touchdown seasons. He's had 1,000 yards rushing. He can do all these things. He just hasn't put it all together in one season. So if he does that, I mean, he's a legit RB1 in an upgraded offense. And I think this is going to be an upgraded offense, right? We'll talk about the quarterbacks in a little bit. I kind of think Jacoby Brissett deserves this job, and we'll talk about that. But I think this is going to be a much better offense than people think. They've got weapons at receiver, right? They've got McLaurin. They've got Jahan Dotson, who had a really, really promising rookie season. I'm not a big Logan Thomas fan, but there's,
Curtis Samuel's a very good wide receiver 3.
Curtis Samuel's kind of a chess piece that, is tough to be fantasy relevant just because you can't count on targets every week or touches every week. But, he's going to make good use of the ones he gets. So I think this is really kind of an under the radar, exciting offensive team.
Yeah, and honestly, I'd love to talk more about Antonio Gibson, but you're offering the perfect segue to the pieces are all there for Washington, and you touched on it before. What do they have under center? Because truthfully, they could execute with the wide receivers. They gave good enough offensive line. They've a capable running back, Antonio Gibson. The defense is really strong on the defensive line and is capable in the secondary. Could use some help at cornerback, but that's another story. But what do they have at quarterback? I personally, I'm going to rehash this now. I'm a Sam Howell guy. I believed in Sam Howell as a prospect. I was floored when he fell as far as he did. Though he was a great competitor with an amazing arm. And I thought it was very natural that after the guy had his 2 wide receivers get drafted to the NFL, both of which didn't succeed without Howell or anyone on the NFL level, all of a sudden he had a slightly down season. But he still was fighting incredibly hard in every single game to get UNC over the hump, despite the fact that the roster really wasn't all that. So I like what Howell can do on the run. I think Bieniemy can work wonders in terms of what Patrick Mahomes does best is making throws that aren't exactly scripted. The ones that were the scrambles not past the line of scrimmage but outside the pocket. And I think Howell can do something like that. He's not Patrick Mahomes by any stretch, but I do think he has the agility to make that type of leap. Now, the hit rate on day 3 quarterbacks is pretty low. It's pretty low. But either way, if it is Jacoby Brissett, you have something a little bit more stable. If it's not, you have something a little bit more exciting. But whether you're going to have that type of playoff ceiling, that's when it comes down to whether Howell can be as good. Because we know Brissett's not going to take this team to – you can take him to the playoffs, but you can't take him beyond the wild card round. No way.
I'm going to take the opposite stance on that.
Ooh.
I'm going to say – and I kind of I referred to this in the article. I think Jacoby Brissett could be this year's Geno Smith.
Oh, come on. Oh,
hear me out.
Come on. Here, I'll hear you out. Let's hear it. Come on.
If you go back a year ago, right, at this time, nobody expected Geno Smith to win that job, right?
For sure.
Everybody thought the Seahawks were going to be a disaster. It was going to be Drew Lock would kind of win the job by default because he was the one they traded for in the Russell Wilson trade. They would just kind of hand him the job and they'd be a mess. Well, Geno Smith won the job and he turned out to be pretty okay, right? He was the QB5, fantasy QB5. That is what it is, but it was obviously fantasy relevant. So, and I think there's a lot of similarities here, right? I don't think anybody really expects Jacoby Brissett to win this job. But if you look back at last year, he wasn't great for fantasy, but if you look at analytically, he was pretty good. Like PFF had him rated like I think the number 5 quarterback last year, and you can kind of take or leave what PFF says, but Football Outsiders also had him ranked pretty high in DVOA and DYAR. So I think when you put those things together, then you're kind of painting a picture of someone who's kind of really seriously underrated. And I think we get back to the kind of Ron Rivera needs to win to keep his job discussion. I think if he wants to win this year, then Jacoby Brissett's the quarterback he's going to want to go with.
See, my only hesitation with that, and it's a good point about what, Rivera is coaching for his job. And when you're coaching for your job, you don't have the luxury of trying out that rookie for 16 games. Because if you start with Howell in week 1, it's hard to pull him because you're not going to want to go back to him. So I see that argument. And if Brissett plays well, he's not going to let it go. However, Geno Smith type of breakouts never happened. The reason why we were as floored with the Seahawks and as floored with Geno Smith as we were last year is because we have never seen something like that ever. As far as my knowledge goes. So in terms of Brissett is a very capable backup. I think that's fine. I think it's fine that he is what he is there. I think expecting him to take a big leap, it's just not in the cards for him. He's turning 31. I know Geno Smith is also up there in age, but he's never been the guy that pushes it downfield. And I think that's exactly what Washington needs to do with this type of personnel. Terry McLaurin needs to be catching the ball downfield, and Sam Howell is a better fit to throw it downfield than Jacoby Brissett is, in my opinion. So I don't want to get too much into offensive philosophy and away from fantasy football because ultimately we are a Dynasty Fantasy Football show. And I love talking offensive philosophy, so we could do that some other time. But either way, let's take the pick right now. End of the year, who is more relevant for fantasy football? We're looking back on it in January. Jacoby Brissett or Sam Howell? Who has more startable weeks?
I think it's Brissett.
I'll go Howell because I think he gets the job. I don't think he lets go of it, but I completely understand the Brissett argument because he's a capable quarterback. Like I don't want this coming across as disrespect for him because he's very solid. I just think that's what he is. He's solid. I'll do a little clap back for Faith here. Oh, that's a wave. Hi, Faith. Good to see you. But we have a lot of other people to talk about. We talked about how good the weapons are. Let's talk about those wide receivers. Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, currently going very close in Dynasty ADP because one's younger, one's proven, but a little bit older. How are you approaching those type of wide receivers right now between Dotson and McLaurin?
I think they're close because they probably should be close, right? So Dotson, I got to say, he seriously impressed me last year. I wasn't real high on him as a prospect. I kind of didn't think he was big enough. I liked what he did in college. I didn't know how well that would translate. It translated pretty well. And he's, I think he's got a little bit of the Christian Watson thing going on where people are kind of overrating him because a lot of his production came on touchdowns, but that's, since when is scoring touchdowns a bad thing, right? It's not like this is Tevin Coleman and like all his production came on touchdowns, right? He was productive. He obviously had the injuries that kind of held him back. I think if there's a second year leap in the cards, with him staying healthy, with him, and we talked about last week about getting that offseason to get stronger and more physical in the weight room with an NFL strength coach and nutritionist and stuff like that. If he uses that time wisely, I think we could see another breakout. I don't know that there's another level for Terry McLaurin. I think we all like Terry McLaurin, but he kind of is what he is. So if I had the choice, I would kind of maybe lean on the upside of Dotson.
Yeah, I get that because we know what McLaurin is. We have a proven quality there. The floor might be higher for McLaurin, but what's going to happen long-term with the Commanders, who knows? Because this team is gearing for a shakeup, like we mentioned, a new ownership group, potentially a new coach next year, almost definitely a new quarterback coming in next year. McLaurin a little bit older at 28 with a new entire front office and system that did not sign him or bring him in or draft him. So there's a lot of things to consider there that Dotson will be a part of because he's still young. He still has a fifth-year option of 3 to 4 years still under contract. So that's where I also lean Dotson. But I'm on the same boat as you. I didn't love him as a prospect. I loved his highlights. Oh my goodness. Some of the most fun college highlights. Take a second and look up his Penn State college highlights. So much fun. But he made a living at Penn State playing bigger than he actually was. All of a sudden he goes up, one hands a ball that's 20 feet in the air. Like, holy crap, how did he do that? And he showed that red zone prowess in the short game last year. He was 6. And he was 6 in fantasy points per target, which again, smaller target share of about 60 targets or so, but he showed that when he was out there and when he got the ball, he was pretty damn good with it. So, and it was also really bad quarterback play last year. It could be really bad again, but it was really bad quarterback play last year. So I lean Dotson as well ever so slightly. It's probably the type of murky situation I'm willing to take on in some, like I find myself passing in a lot of mocks I do just because they're going where they should. And I'm willing to take them where they shouldn't, if that makes sense. They're going in that late wide receiver 2 range. And I'd rather have them as a wide receiver 3 for both of them, just because it's Washington, man. Even Terry McLaurin, who's been an excellent wide receiver, has had so many dud games because of just inaccurate throws. Just being an inch away from a 60, an 8-point swing on your fantasy lineup because the ball is just thrown 20 yards out of bounds because he sucks. Like, whatever. I've been a Terry McLaurin fan. He was the first player that I picked up in Dynasty that turned into like a huge breakout, and he's never got the respect that he should have. So I'm more hands off at cost than other people are, but I would prefer Dotson to McLaurin ever so slightly at this point. Now, quick toucher, you're an Antonio Gibson guy. Let's talk Brian Robinson, man. Anything there? His rushing line right now is being set at 800.5 on DraftKings. He's being drafted, I believe, as the. I looked it up the other day. Oh, no. Sorry. I'm mixing it up with Cam Akers. Either way, Brian Robinson, thoughts on Brian Robinson? Any hope for him to be anything more than kind of the plotter he was last year? He did get a lot of touches.
No, I think he is what he is. If on a team with a more kind of dynamic option to be that guy, I mean, this team needs that guy because Antonio Gibson probably isn't. But we talked earlier, like Chris Rodriguez, who's they drafted in the 5th, 6th round, is really the same player. It's the exact same player as Brian Robinson. So obviously, I don't think they are committed to him in any way as being kind of the feature of that position. I would kind of fantasy wise, he's never going to be kind of the sexy option, right? Because he's not going to catch passes. He's going to come off the field in passing situations. He's really a 2-down plotter. So not a whole lot of love for that.
Run either.
Right. Yeah. Your only upside is like a huge touchdown ceiling season. And
you're up.
Not something I want to bet on.
Exactly. Yeah. His upside is taking 16 carries for 60 yards and 2 scores. Yep. Right. I mean, that's really what we're looking for. And I think that kind of answers the question we got in here about Gibson versus Brian Robinson in a PPR, although with a 0.2 points per carry little bonus there, which definitely does help Brian Robinson. But I can't imagine, like, it's such a weird thought to think about Eric Bieniemy with Brian Robinson, right? Eric Bieniemy is a versatile play caller. Jerick McKinnon was the guy sometimes. Isaiah Pacheco, guys with speed, guys who can catch at times. Not Pacheco, but McKinnon. And what CH was supposed to be. You know, it's supposed to be this prolific pass catcher. And Brian Robinson is none of those things. So he is a Scott Turner fit of, hey, where's my Jonathan Stewart guy from Carolina? But Brian Robinson's not working with Scott Turner anymore. So I'm with you, man. I'm with you with the Antonio Gibson train. I think that's definitely our answer here, despite the point per carry bonus. Any other Washington players you want to talk about? I'm equally disinterested in Logan Thomas and have no interest in bringing him up.
Yeah, we've kind of heard rumblings about Logan Thomas's fit in this offense. Logan Thomas isn't Travis Kelce, so let's not even go there. It's not even close.
So much.
Yeah.
Oh, I hate that.
It's
kind
of angry. That role exists because Travis Kelce is who he is. So yeah,
did you know? No, that role exists because Tony Gonzalez exists, and he created Travis Kelce.
Right.
Just like Dennis Pitta created Mark Andrews. That's trust me. I have a source. Anyway, let's talk about another team here, the Pittsburgh Steelers. My Pittsburgh Steelers. Good old Adam Hollis, wrote about Deontay Johnson for this piece. Exactly the same player I would have wrote if I talked about it, so I'm glad he chose it. At Mr. Hollis, HALLAS on Twitter. So be sure to check him out. He's an awesome follow. Wrote about Deontay Johnson and the man who had 0 touchdowns last year despite having a billion targets. But they were all low-value targets, so we didn't really care for fantasy, and ultimately hurt your team probably more than he helped it. But we're looking into year 2 of Kenny Pickett, year 3 of Matt Canada, but year 2 with Kenny Pickett. Any thoughts for Deontay Johnson and when we're talking about this Kenny Pickett type of leap that some people are projecting?
I'm not seeing that leap, but as far as Deontay Johnson goes, draft targets, hope for touchdowns, right? It didn't go well last year. It can't be worse, right? It's going to be better. He's a guy who's been an elite target earner his entire career, even with a much more crowded receiver room. So yeah, I'm all in on the Deontay Johnson bounce back.
Yeah, it just comes down to positive regression, right? I mean, I'm pulling it up right now. Do you want to guess how many players have more targets since 2020? You want to take a guess at a number?
I'll say
this is off the cuff. So
I can think of like 2 off the top of my head that I would say definitely. So I'll say maybe 4.
That's it. There you go, Matt. 4. It's Devontae Adams, elite. Stephon Diggs, elite. Justin Jefferson, elite. Tyreek Hill, elite.
Yep.
Deontay Johnson right there. And then after that, you're dropping 30 targets down to Travis Kelce. So that's the group. Those guys are all next to each other, and then there's a steep drop. Deontay Johnson, clearly the major standout of not being a top 5 fantasy wide receiver in that group. So, yeah, I'm not a big Kenny Pickett fan. I haven't been. I was very upset when they drafted him, truthfully. But I do acknowledge that this is a statistical situation of Deontay Johnson doesn't need to score 9 touchdowns to increase his fantasy value. Right. He needs to score 4 or 5 or 6. And all of a sudden, that low-end wide receiver 2 becomes a high-end wide receiver 2, closer to wide receiver 1, closer to the top 12 than to the top 20.
Right.
So that's a significant change in the ceilings, because if you get a ceiling, you can deal with the lows. If he catches 5 balls for 30 yards one week, that's not great. But if he catches, 7 for 70 and 1 the next week, you feel better about it. You're willing to stomach the lows to get the highs. There just haven't been highs yet.
Yeah, and I'll say about Kenny Pickett, right? I don't like him. I didn't like him as a prospect. We've joked about Jordan Addison making him and creating him to be the greatest receiver of all time because of that. But he's still they still gave starts to Mitch Trubisky last year, and he was really bad, much worse than Kenny Pickett. If there's some development, right? So those starts should be better. If Pickett gets, he he doesn't have to be a fantasy superstar. If he can just kind of cut down the interceptions, be a better real life quarterback, that's going to open up opportunities for the offense. It's going to open up more touchdown opportunities for Deontay Johnson. So, and I think that should happen. So, yeah, I'm very much all aboard. I think if you're drafting Deontay Johnson based on his 0 touchdown season and not the Deontay Johnson of kind of 2020, 2021, I think that's a serious mistake.
And when we did this show about the Green Bay Packers, you talked about the offensive philosophy type of switch with Aaron Rodgers out. I'm gonna take a second here to talk about the Steelers' offensive philosophy switch with a second year in the system with Kenny Pickett, because it was on record last year that Matt Canada wasn't calling plays downfield because the organization didn't want those mistakes being made. So they limited him. Kenny Pickett was bottom 5 in yards per attempt. They were clearly an inept offense, but that's because it was all restricted. Now, you go into year 2. You have George Pickens going into year 2 with a full year to get ready for that. You add Allen Robinson, who I do not love, but it's still better than the wide receiver 3 that the Steelers had last year, which is not great at all. So you look at this type of team, you have Freiermuth in the middle, you have Deontay Johnson. They have the pieces to have a good passing attack. They beefed up the offensive line. They spent a fortune on the interior. They added Broderick Jones at tackle, and whether he starts over Dan Moore will be another thing, but they have depth either way. This is a much improved offensive team that will have to push it downfield because they have the personnel to do it. They just didn't have the time last year or the willingness because of the rookie status of Kenny Pickett. So I think this is going to be a much more stretched out offense. You're going to see a lot more shots downfield with George Pickens. And when that happens, it opens underneath for Deontay Johnson to catch the ball and go for another 5 yards instead of being tackled immediately like it happened last season and us having 1 target equal 3 yards. Now it'll be one target equals 9 yards, and that's a significant difference. So that's what I'm hoping for with the Steelers. I think that's what everyone's hoping for. And even if it leads to more mistakes, it at least opens up the offense to have higher scoring upside on a week-to-week basis that just wasn't there last year.
Yeah, and I think going back to Deontay Johnson, he's like 26, right? That's really kind of the sweet spot, right? He's in his still in his physical prime. He's established himself as the elite target earner we referred to earlier. And he's still a couple years away from being a kind of hands off, he's too old dynasty asset. So he's a guy he's falling in kind of startup drafts, and I don't get it. I don't get it. I'm just kind of sweeping him up wherever I can.
I feel wrong taking him as I'm doing a redraft as well, but in the best balls I'm in right now, I've been taking him like rounds ahead of where I feel like I should be. We're trying to wait for him, but I'm a gambler in a way. I try to see, can I wait one more round for him? But he's the type of guy I find myself taking a round before because I feel comfortable enough because ADB is that low right now. MF Dive Steeler, I see you in the chat with the trade offer. We have a whole trade segment coming at the end of the show, probably about 15 minutes or so we'll touch on that then. But other players on the Pittsburgh Steelers, I touched on it before. George Pickens is a very polarizing player in the Dynasty community right now. You see the Gabe Davis comps being thrown around like it's candy, which is incredibly disrespectful. And also, sorry, no apologies. You're good, my man. I'm happy to see you here tossing it in the chat. But the incredibly disrespectful comparisons to Gabe Davis with George Pickens, I just don't. It's just because they're two big dudes who run fast downfield. But what's your thoughts on George Pickens? Because he will be the wide receiver 2 for this offense, and I'm calling for shots downfield.
Yeah, I think the Pickens thing is almost reached a tipping point where he's gone from kind of overvalued to undervalued.
Yeah.
So he's kind of so overrated he's underrated or something like whatever that.
It's a real thing. It's a real thing.
Yeah. So I think early in the offseason, you had a lot of dynasty kind of experts coming out and saying, George Pickens is overrated. Don't let the highlights, influence how you draft him and what you think about him. And all the things they're saying was true, right? It's not going to be a super high passing volume offense.
Sure.
It's not going to be the Kansas City Chiefs, but I think people have just gone so far the other direction that where they're just so, I can't have this guy. I don't want this guy on my team. I don't want the next Gabe Davis, like you alluded to, that, he's almost been becoming he's useful, right? He's a useful player. He's not. I don't have any aspirations that he's going to be a superstar, but I think he's still a useful player. So if you can get him at sub starter level trade, then yeah, I'm all for it.
I've been a victim of that exact ideology this offseason, of myself talking myself out of him, because I see the numbers. And listen, yeah, he had a similar yards per route run to Gabe Davis, prior to the breakout potential that we were talking about with Gabe Davis. It was a good yards per route run that both of them had. Doesn't take it away. Right. And also, I don't care. I'm sorry, they're different players. Just because these metrics are the same, I could pull up different metrics and compare Christian McCaffrey to, I don't know, CEH, because they both caught a lot of balls in college. Who cares? When I look at it that way, it's different offensive systems. It's different offensive schemes. You have a rookie-to-rookie type of connection here. And I'm sorry, it didn't work out with Gabe Davis, but that was a lottery pick that people are willing to take because that upside that they flashed. George Pickens is flashing the same upside. Doesn't mean they can't hit the ceiling just because Gabe Davis didn't. So I like him. I am just very aware about what his production will mean in a good season. Because his production means that there will be one game where he puts up 0. His production means where there'll be 3 or 4 games where he puts up less than 4. And it will really hurt you. But there'll be other games where he'll be very good. And there'll be games where he makes up for it on one catch. So it's going to be very up and down nature, almost akin to Mike Williams before the coaching change, early career Mike Williams in a way, of where it was yay or nay. And you had Keenan Allen, which is Deontay Johnson in this situation, kind of cleaning up on the middle. So that's kind of what I'm expecting from George Pickens. I think it's going to be a good season. The way he hits his perceived ceiling is through touchdowns, but I'm calling for about 26 touchdowns from Kenny Pickett. I don't think he hits the 30 mark or anything, but either way, George Pickens will need touchdowns to hit a top 15 ceiling, but I think he could very well finish inside the top 24. And at the very least, you can pick your weeks to play him.
Yeah, I think the Mike Williams comp is probably a good one. He belongs in kind of that bucket with Gabe Davis, with Mike Williams. They're really kind of the same player, and that they're going to have some high highs and they're going to have some low lows. And if you value that properly, they're useful players. So as long as you don't go in expecting him to be in every week start, as long as he's kind of in your flex, kind of that flex area where you can. I don't like this matchup. I got somebody else I can slide in there. He's a useful player, right? He's going to have some boom weeks. So that is value.
Yeah, there's Thursday night football rolls around. Your opponent has somebody who dropped 35 points on Thursday night, and you're looking between Tyler Boyd and George Pickens or something like that. I'm going to shoot for the stars, and I'm going to go for George Pickens. That's not the exact situation, but I'm talking.
I would take Pickens over Boyd pretty much every week.
I was trying to think of it on the fly of someone who's just safe but low ceiling, and I had that for some reason. Tyler Boyd is the picture perfect slot receiver for me thinking that. But either way, let's talk about some other Pittsburgh Steelers. Najee Harris, I want to go to the ground game here, has not been very efficient. But he had a very efficient and talented and good end to the year last year after his screw got taken out of his foot from the Lisfranc injury and enjoyed an incredible end of the season. Now you have an improved offensive line and hopefully an offensive step forward in the right direction compared to how bad it was last year. But Jaylen Warren is being tossed around as as someone who's going to get more touches than the backup for the Steelers has ever gotten before. So what are your thoughts right now on the very high, still reasonably high dynasty price of Najee Harris?
Harris is kind of he's just like George Pickens, right? It's the kind of analytics guys just don't like him at all, and the people who value touches like him a lot. So he's going to get touches, right?
I value touches.
This is an offense that Mike Tomlin, under a coach that values a bell cow back and will deploy a bell cow level back. And we've seen all kinds of backup running backs for Pittsburgh come and go, whether it was James Conner at number 1 or, Lev Bell at number 1 or Najee Harris as the number 1 back. We've seen just a bunch of guys just rotate in and out behind them and just do absolutely nothing. I and that's no kind of slander at Jaylen Warren. I just don't expect there to be a role for him because I expect Harris to be able to, he's taken that role and kind of run with it. You alluded to the upgrade in offensive line. I think that should help him. The kind of upgrade in offense should be the rising tide that lifts all boats. So, yeah, as long as you don't, he's not Christian McCaffrey, but he's a very useful player. I don't see a world where he's not an RB1, barring injury, obviously. So just because he's going to get so many touches, he's useful in the passing game. He's useful in the run game. It's a team that wants to deploy a bell cow. He's kind of what, we're looking for. Dynasty's a little dicey just because he is so old. He came into the league at such an advanced age.
Yep.
So he may be a guy that you need to kind of ride his trade value. He's always going to be a more productive, a more point scoring valuable player than kind of trade value player. That's just never going to change. So as long as you're kind of willing to just ride that out, and we've seen guys, look at all these guys like Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones, Derrick Henry, who've all 2-3 years now, we've all been expecting them to fall off and their trade value is kind of disintegrated, but they're still producing, right? So I think Najee Harris is going to graduate into that role. He's going to be a guy you're probably just going to have to let age out on your roster, but he's going to score a lot of points.
Yeah, and the only year that we've seen Mike Tomlin not really use a bell cow was when his other bell cow, for the other bell cow that left the team, got hurt. When James Conner was hurt after Le'Veon Bell left, they tried giving Benny Snell a bell cow work, and it was just so bad that they brought back D'Angelo Williams. It was a mess,
right?
And that's what it took to not have a bell cow running back. And sure, Jaylen Warren will have a role, but he was efficient last year because we talked about him a few weeks ago on the show about what Alexander Madison has done as a backup running back. Because backup running backs should be more efficient than the starter. They're coming in more fresh. They're going into a worn down defense. They're being used in select situations. So that's, good for Jaylen Warren and all, but Najee Harris is the guy for Pittsburgh, and he has been since they drafted him in the first round. And let's see, you were right on point with the last question I asked you, Joel, about a quick little trivia thing. I'm going to do it to you again. Apologize because I didn't prep you at all, but from week 10 to week 18, which I'm going after his bye week, where do you think Najee Harris was in the RB rankings? This is post bye week when he got the screw out of his foot. He is healthy. He's ready to go. He was the RB what?
I'll say 6.
RB7. Right there. And RB6 was James Conner, the guy who got a similar type of workload. And when you look at that, that's 15 points per game. It's the same exact usage that he got the year before, except at the end of the year, he was a lot better with his touches. He was game-changing. His catch against Baltimore I still dream about it on occasion. I dream. I lay down on my pillow. I pull up my Najee Harris little snuggie, and I say, hey, you remember when he caught like that? Because he's a damn good receiver and a better receiver than Jaylen Warren still. So I am very excited for what Najee Harris can do in this offense that should be better. And in my eyes, he's one of the safest RBs in fantasy football this year. And I think that's not being baked into – it doesn't get baked into his – you said it perfectly. It doesn't get baked into his trade value, but it does get baked into his ADP, which is a very interesting paradox that we got going on in the Dynasty community right now.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have a sour taste in their mouth, and you kind of alluded to it, is because he started off he was a first-round draft pick like in redraft last year, right? Because of the volume, he really kind of struggled early because of the foot. And then, I think if you were kind of had a redraft mentality, that probably cost you your season, right? So you may not have been paying attention as much at the end when he kind of really turned things on. I think that kind of clouds his perception a little bit in that, he was that end of the season. He was exactly what we expected him to be on draft day, redraft draft day last year. So, and I think that's the kind of guy we need to look at going forward.
And I really do chalk it up to the injury to the foot. It was an issue in August. It carried into September, and it carried into it. And then I played the game with you before. Let's talk about it now. Najee Harris weeks 1 to 8. I'm cutting out 9 because it was the bye week. I don't want to sway the ranks with that. What was Najee Harris? RB what from week 1 to week 8? We said he was the RB7 before.
I'll say he was out of RB2 range, RB29.
RB23. So a little bit better, but it didn't feel that way. And that also doesn't factor in a few, teams that had their bye week prior to some of those early buys in the season. So really, in points per game, I'm sure he was down at RB 20, probably around 29, around 26, 27. So yeah, it was not a good start. I chalk it up to the injury. Hopefully he'll be healthy entering the season this year and he can continue where he left off. One more Steeler I think we should talk about. Don't need to spend time too much on Kenny Pickett, but I do want to talk about Freiermuth. Somebody that I love as a talent, but I have never once looked at drafting right now in any mock that I've done. And it's weird because I think he's a very good tight end. And I think he was an incredible safety blanket for Kenny Pickett last year that should carry over in some way. But he seems to be going much, much higher than I feel comfortable taking. What's your temperature right now on Pat Freiermuth?
Yeah, I'm agree with that. I think people are kind of counting on him to be some people are counting on him to be kind of the breakout tight end. I'm not going to draft him as such. I think he's just kind of in that kind of replaceable tier after the top, whatever, 6, 7, reliable guys. I think I don't think he should be going, significantly ahead of, say, David Njoku or Juwan Johnson or, any of those guys who haven't really proven it, that they are kind of elite options at the tight end position.
And you threw out a name right there that I'm exactly looking at I find myself waiting 2-3 more rounds and just taking David Njoku, who I really like this year as a potential sleeper. But I'm going to throw out one other name of this or that, and then we'll move on to our final look inside team. I'll going back to back right now on tight end ADP, Evan Ingram or Pat Freiermuth.
Oof. My distaste for Evan Ingram is longstanding.
I used to have it, but I've shaken it. I shook it off a little bit.
I will take Freiermuth over Ingram. I brought this point up quite a bit. 49% of Ingram's fantasy production came in a 4-week stretch between weeks 13 and 16. And he was completely unusable basically before that. And he had been so bad immediately before that you realistically could not have been starting him at that time. So I think part of that was kind of unusable. Add Calvin Ridley into that offense. Oof. Yeah. He's not someone I'm actively targeting or trying. I do not want to go into the season with Evan Ingram as my tight end.
Yeah.
So I will take Freiermuth. I'm okay with Freiermuth. I'm not okay with Ingram.
I'm the same way. And I don't want to talk about Ingram too much. We were talking Steelers here. But I find it so interesting that it was reported in like March and February that his extension was a done deal. We are now several months later. He's on the tag. They have not come to a long-term deal. They drafted a tight end, Brenton Strange, in the 3rd round. You read the tea leaves here. If I'm looking at Brian Windhorst here and pulling the what is going on in Jacksonville, it's telling me that Evan Ingram is going to be testing the market, or at least coming back on a much cheaper deal than he was expecting. But we're not talking about Evan Ingram. We're talking about the Steelers. And now we're going to transition on over to our 3rd and final team, the Detroit Lions. So last year's darling team, the team that everyone was rooting for, they went out and signed Dave Montgomery for a fat bag of cash, as Andrew Metcalf at DrewMet_FF on Twitter wrote for our Club Fantasy site. Again, check out all those articles at clubfantasyffl.com. But Dave Montgomery is somebody that I was trying to trade for, did draft, and then subsequently trade away shortly after the NFL draft when they took Jahmyr Gibbs. So a very interesting running back conundrum here between Dave Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, one of which is going inside the top 5 in Dynasty ADP, more or less, at running back, and one of which is well outside the top 20. So what's your temperature on Dave Montgomery?
We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I would significantly rather have Montgomery at his cost than Jahmyr Gibbs at his cost.
Even in Dynasty, you're saying?
Even in Dynasty, absolutely. Yeah. In Dynasty. Yeah. I think Gibbs is being kind of wildly overdrafted. I don't think he should be the kind of clear number 2 non-quarterback. Coming out of, as a prospect, the big question on him was, can he run between the tackles? And Detroit has someone who we know can do that and is good at that. So I don't see a role for him in doing that. He's going to be a space back. But I don't think there's a path to consistent carries for Jahmyr Gibbs.
Well, he's going to catch all those passes that DeAndre Swift caught last year, Joel.
And DeAndre Swift is in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And they gave him up for basically nothing. Obviously, some of that had to do with Gibbs, but so yeah, I think David Montgomery, but behind that line, which is right up there with Philly and among the best lines in the league, taking over a role that gave Jamal Williams 17 touchdowns last year. It's all David Montgomery. Yeah, relative to cost, I wouldn't be surprised at all if David Montgomery outscores Jahmyr Gibbs this year. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he outscores him next year. So yeah, at dynasty value, I'm still taking David Montgomery over Jahmyr Gibbs.
My bold take that apparently isn't that bold, because I think you might agree with it, around Jahmyr Gibbs right now is I liked him as a prospect. I wasn't blown away as a prospect that people are anointing him as the generational back that he's not. And sure, they spent very high draft capital on him, and that matters. And he will be valuable at some point in his career because he is a damn good pass catcher and an elusive runner. But I don't think he's going to be a top 5 back in his career. I don't know if he's going to be a top 8 back in his career in any given year, in terms of just pure NFL talent standpoint. And in the meantime, you have David Montgomery signed to for what I believe it was 3 years of $18 million, 2 of which will probably be guaranteed. And he's going to get a lot of work because David Montgomery is not a guy you bring in, fresh off the juice to get him to run 50 yards downfield. He does not do that. He comes in, he gets the early down work, he runs, he establishes the tempo, and then Jahmyr Gibbs punishes you. That's the workload that they're going to try to establish. And I like David Montgomery a little bit more than Jahmyr Gibbs this year as well. And I think that's something nobody's saying in the Dynasty community right now. But here we are on the Dynasty After Party, Joel and I, throwing out the fire takes here because, listen, 17 touchdowns. Let's go regression. Bring it down to 8. 8. You can easily. 8 will go to Dave Montgomery. It won't go to Jahmyr Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs will have to make his hay somewhere else. And I think this Detroit Lions team is going to be in for a bit of a rude awakening this year after the hype fest that they got last year. I'm expecting them, maybe not a significant step back, but a step back for the Detroit Lions. And I
don't know that it's going to be a step back. I think people expect them to take that next step.
Sure,
and I think
that's a fair point.
It's a lot easier to go from kind of also ran to competitive than it is to go from competitive to division front runner. That's a very different thing.
Yeah, I wish I looked it up before the show, but the last time Detroit won the division probably wasn't when I was alive. In fact, I vaguely remember from me looking it up, they might not have ever. I don't know. I don't want to say something that isn't true.
I think it was. I want to say it was probably 94. So yeah, long before you were born.
Yeah, well, yeah, I am a youngin. Let's see. Yeah, no, they haven't. I thought so. They have never won the NFC North. The last time they won it, I remember now, was when the NFC North was called something else. But they have not won the NFC North ever,
would have been
let alone in my lifestyle. So
no, they've never won the division.
It was one of the Central, yeah. So
back when Tampa Bay was in the Central.
Yeah, so betting against the historical first tier, as good as Jared Goff was last year, let's cool the brakes. But either way, let's talk about some other Detroit Lions. We talked about the running game there. I don't even want to spend too much time on Amon-Ra St. Brown because I think he's as locked as loaded as it gets, right? We're on the same page that he will be a wide receiver 1. He'll be very safe. He's awesome. I love him so much. He's awesome.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason to kind of fade Jahmyr Gibbs, right? Because he's going to run in kind of the same. He's going to be a target hog, and he kind of runs in the same space as Gibbs is going to, right? If you look at where kind of Gibbs ran in Alabama, it's kind of in that same area. And getting back to Jahmyr Gibbs, right? There's really no difference between him and Devon Achane in Miami, and they're the same as a prospect.
Spicy.
As a prospect, they are the exact same player, right? Whether you like one or the other, they're very similar prospects. And Miami's just a much more conducive offense to Devon Achane succeeding at what they do best than Jahmyr Gibbs is, right? Because you're going to have Waddle and Tyreek Hill kind of clearing the field, whereas Detroit's going to have, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta kind of condensing the field.
And they have Marvin Jones to stretch the field now. They brought back Marvin Jones. Yeah,
fair point. I will concede that. And Detroit's got David Montgomery in that kind of early down role. Miami right now has Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson, and I don't think they're going to sign Dalvin Cook. So I'm higher on Achane than I am Gibbs, right? At relative cost. I think they're the exact same player, and I think Achane's in a better situation. That's spicy, I know. That's not a take you're going to hear all the time.
No, it's not. But I agree the fit's better. I do agree with that, because as soon as Achane landed in Miami, and I don't want to talk too much about Miami because we will talk Miami at some point, but it is a perfect fit. If I had to pick a team for him to go to, it would have been Miami, with the way they use their speed players, the uncertain backfield, and what he brings that Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson don't. And you look at Jahmyr Gibbs, sure, he is we wondered how's he going to fit with Swift. Swift is gone. And now, I don't like David Montgomery as a receiver because I don't think he's quick enough. I think he can get it done, but he has some wiggle. But
he's a good pass blocker though, right? And Jahmyr Gibbs never pass blocked at Alabama, ever. I mean, he was in the backfield and he was running a route. He never pass blocked. So David Montgomery's a solid pass blocker.
Yeah. So then that's the other question then, is if they're even splitting third down work, and maybe Jahmyr Gibbs grabs, if it's going to happen for Gibbs in year one, I really do believe it's going to be the back half. It'll take an injury for it to happen early in the season, because there will be an adjustment period where they need to find a place for him to work. And rookie running backs pass blocking early doesn't happen that often. They're either finding ways to go
especially
around that.
Especially a guy who's that inexperienced and that undersized, right?
Undersized is a big
Devon Achane's undersized as well, but he's done it, right? He did it at A&M. He was not bad at it. He was pretty good, relative.
A lot of high effort play from
relatively pretty good. So, yeah, I mean, it's if that's a place you want to tear down, if that's the kind of style of player you want, you can get a very similar player much, much later in your startup drafts and your rookie drafts.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. Let's talk about Jared Goff right now. Probably the last player for this Detroit Lions who we need to talk about, because Sam Laporta right now is a stash and play. Are either of us expecting anything from year one for Laporta? It's a lot of opportunity, but I never expect anything from rookie tight ends.
Yeah, I liked him as a prospect, but it's remember TJ Hawkinson really struggled in that offense and then went to Minnesota and blew up. So I don't know that this really is a super tight end friendly offense. Yeah, and we kind of talked about how Amon-Ra St. Brown kind of runs in that same area. So I don't think it's a high volume role for Laporta.
If you like Laporta in Dynasty, try to buy him in 3 months. It's certainly not going to happen in the first half of the year. But yeah, let's talk Jared Goff for a second, because he's somebody that had an excellent fantasy season, especially over the back half of the season. With the whole rise that Detroit had, Jared Goff was a QB1 for the back half of that season, was an excellent player for fantasy football. Does that continue in 2023?
I think he's kind of the ideal super flex third quarterback, just because you can spot him, because his home and road splits are so severe.
They were.
So yeah, if you can spot him and kind of don't have to take those road starts, because you've got a better option, and then you can kind of plug and play him on the home starts if you want to, that's awesome. I think there's a spot for that. If you're relying on him as kind of an every week starter, that's a tough sell.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at as well. He's the type of guy I would like to be able to stream. And even as your QB2, truthfully, you can have him for a lot of your games. And I like Jared Goff enough this year because he proved in the second half of the year that he could take care of the ball. He threw a whopping 1 interception from week 8 on. It was really impressive what he was able to do once he settled into that. And you remember, that last year was his first year in Detroit. You didn't have James Williams for a large stretch of it. I bring up week 8 because that's when TJ Hawkinson was traded out of town. So it's really the Amon-Ra St. Brown show and the occasional missing poster milk carton of DeAndre Swift from all of us asking where he is and occasionally him running on the field. It was not a good group that Jared Goff was working with last year, and especially in the back half when he had his best play. So I think he could have I think it could be a same trajectory of Jameson Williams could get back, and I think Jameson Williams is an excellent player. And this time he's not recovered from injury. He's just come back from a gambling suspension. So I think Jared Goff could be somebody that could be actually a force in the fantasy playoffs. Again, those home road splits were very real last year, but I'm relatively in at cost for Jared Goff right now. I think he's being undervalued in dynasty circles. And he's still young.
Yeah,
not that old.
Yeah, and if you're in a 1 QB league and you kind of don't want to invest in the elite quarterbacks, again, he's a really good guy to have on your roster as a spot start guy. You mix him with an Aaron Rodgers or maybe a Tua or something like that, or if you want to wait, take Kyler and then kind of hope he comes back later and let Goff just kind of hold down the fort early in the season. You can kind of do that, but yeah, he's not someone I kind of want to have to rely on as an every week starter.
Sure. Yeah. Because we know what he is. We know what the lows can be. The lows can be negative points in some bad situations. But let's talk about the trades now. Let's go to our do better trade section. And we got one in the chat, which is awesome to see. And again, a perfect example of you guys. Feel free to drop some questions in at the end of the day. We are here to help you. We're not here trying to talk into the void. We're here to talk directly to you. So we got a trade offer here from MF Dice Dealer. Superflex. He's getting Kirk Cousins for DeAndre Swift. Well, to me, that's a smash trade. I'd say do better to the other guy, but even though he's got Justin Herbert and he's got the Justins. He's got Justin Herbert and Justin Fields and Kenny Pickett, which is a really good Superflex room, in my opinion. Swift is his RB3/4 behind Breece, Javonte, and Brian Robinson, so a little bit thin at running back, especially if you move on from Breece, or especially if you move on from Swift. But I am of the opinion in Dynasty, especially in the offseason, that I just want value, and Kirk Cousins is value there.
Yeah, absolutely. That quarterback is going to be supremely valuable. He's going to give you the flexibility to kind of, if you need to move a quarterback for something else, you can move Cousins, you can move Pickett. You're not going to want to move Herbert or Fields, but just because you're not starting those guys doesn't mean they're not valuable to you. They're chips.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't love that running back room with two guys coming off knee surgeries and Brian Robinson, who we talked about, we're not super high on. But DeAndre Swift isn't fixing that running back room by himself. So yeah, I'll take the value here.
I have the same question marks about DeAndre Swift. A, staying healthy. B, fit. C, I think I'm excited for Rashad Penny this year. I am. But I've been baited before. I'll be baited again. Either way, we agree. Kirk Cousins there. And then, hell, pick up the phone, make a call. Maybe he's traded out of town in 2 months when you have a running back a little bit close to the season that you actually want to get, that you feel a lot more comfortable at. Because I guarantee you, mid-season, you could trade Kirk Cousins for more than Swift is worth. That's how I feel about it. Kirk Cousins is still playing at the top of his game. I am a believer. Either way, let's talk about a couple more trades as the show starts to wind down here. Stay with us, please. Jamar Chase. Had Jamar Chase trade last week. We're going to double up here from our lovely Josh Hudson. So, Jamar Chase, Christian Kirk, the 110 in this year's draft, and the 210 for CeeDee Lamb, Rashad Bateman, the 205, and 2 2024 firsts. Thoughts, Joel? I flipped back and forth when we were first told about this one.
Yeah, when I first looked at this, I thought it was, I definitely want the Chase side. And then I kind of looked into it and I'm like, I think this is a pretty fair trade. I think this is, I could see being happy with this trade from both sides. Obviously, always going to be tough to give up Chase, but this is a good package, right? CeeDee Lamb's kind of one tier below. He's not in that Chase Jefferson tier, but he's right next to it. And in any given year, I could see CeeDee Lamb outperforming Jamar Chase, right? That wouldn't surprise me at all. I wouldn't expect it, but I could see it. Bateman, I don't love, but 224 first is a lot.
That's the thing, man.
That's the 205.
You're an A-chain guy. Let's call the 110 A-chain. Does that sway you at all?
No, I mean, the value is what it is. It's probably going to be more valuable as a chip than the pick it represents. I could see being happy from either side. The Chase side is getting Chase, getting Kirk, who I like a lot too. So, if if this is between a contender and a non-contender, I could see both sides being really happy with this deal.
Yeah, I'm more or less the same line of you get Jamar Chase as the bounty you have to pay. I probably would slightly rather have CD Lamb in the 2 firsts, but to me, it's what your team is at. Jamar Chase and Christian Kirk significantly help your chances this year than CD Lamb or Rashad Bateman, and then picks that will have to be traded to help you this year. So if I'm trying to win right now, Christian Kirk does matter to me here. So
I like Kirk a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So
I would, if you went Bateman and the 205, I would rather have Kirk.
Oh,
but
same.
It's close.
So then it's CD Lamb and yeah, exactly. And the 110 isn't anything to sneeze at either. So I probably would lean the CD side just because I like the value and the flexibility that having 2 firsts do. I almost always say yes to 2 firsts, but Jamar Chase is otherworldly unique. So I completely understand trading the house for him. One more trade here that happened in my home dynasty league, and I won't lie, I threw up my hands, I threw up my phone because it was something I don't agree with. 1 quarterback league here: Dalton Kincaid, Trevor Lawrence, and Travis Etienne for Christian McCaffrey, Trey Lance, Chris Godwin, Trey McBride, and Darren Waller. I have strong feelings about this, but I want to hear yours.
I don't know how this is not the McCaffrey side.
Yes. Okay. That's me. I was very, not very frustrated, but frustrated in the sense of it's the type of person, it's the person I've been trying to trade with for a minute for Darren Waller and Chris Godwin at value. And then they
gave them all away in the same deal.
And I see this notification on my phone, a trade has been accepted. I'm like, could it be mine? No, it can't be mine. Yeah, not for me. His justification was that he's going to a rebuild. He wanted the youth of Lawrence, Kincaid, and Etienne, but I have his first. So nice. I'm trying to tell myself I'm happy for it, but like,
this is the kind of trade where if I see this deal, I'm looking at the team. I'm immediately looking at the team that got the Kincaid Lawrence side and saying, okay, what can I take from them?
Yeah, no, this is a fire sale example. This is something you look at and say they know where they're at, and they're looking to offload everything. So, and especially for picks, you can get it for cheap. And honestly, as soon as the show ends, I'm probably going to send an offer to. Although my good friend is in Korea, and I don't know if the time zones line up. But either way,
no reason not to send an offer. He'll see it when he wakes up, right?
Yeah, I'll I'll probably do that. But it goes to show you how when you're entering a rebuild, it doesn't mean just send everything for youth.
Yeah,
it means send everything for value. And if you're looking for value, picks can be a good way to assure that you get that.
And if you're trying to rebuild, why are you packaging all these guys in one deal? Right?
That's you're preaching to the choir here, man.
That's really bad process.
I offered, whatever.
I think you can get a lot more for this package if you kind of pieced it out. If you want to rebuild, I get wanting to move off these guys. That's perfectly fine, but don't package them all. Now now what do you have left? What do you have left to trade out of? And so now your team that going into next year is Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, Dalton Kincaid, and not your own first. That's not enough.
Oh, my friend, let me just, because we're in the middle of this, the show's winding down. We're a little bit over the hour mark, but I'll enjoy and regale the I'm calling out my friend too much here, but I'm okay with it. I'm going to read this starting lineup real quick, and then we're going to call the night here. So he's got Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, Rachaad White, Kadarius Toney, Mike Williams, Tyler Lockett, Chigo Okonkwo, James Conner, and Dante Foreman. So there are a lot of pieces there that I will be sending offers for, like James Conner and like Tyler Lockett, that are significantly undervalued because of their age on a team that is already selling away. And I think, honestly, it's a perfect example of what we've been telling you guys to do on this show for a month now, to go after guys like that are on teams that are looking to make a significant step in a direction and taking the veterans off those teams.
And this is a team that I'm going to look at and say, okay, if he was willing to make this package deal, I'm going to try and get Conner and Lockett in the same deal and see what that's going to cost.
Yeah. And I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it right after the show. Either way, thank you all for tuning in to this week's episode of the Dynasty After Party. You notice it started at 8. That's probably what we're going to be sticking to going forward. And honestly, I think we're all very happy about that. So thank you again for tuning in. You can follow myself at Michael __Sicoli on Twitter, and follow Joel here at the Joel Wirth, and of course, Club Fantasy FFL, where this is all being brought to you from at Club Fantasy FFL on Twitter. And of course, we talked about the articles about a look inside series that we're doing all throughout this summer. Those are all available on the website to read at club or on clubfantasyffl.com. Next week, we're talking Bucks, Seahawks, and Dolphins. So we talk about A-Chain again in 7 days. I'm sure you're jumping at the seams to do that, Joel. Any final message you want to send us off with?
No, just everyone be safe. Have a good 4th, and we'll look forward to seeing you back next week.
That's exactly it. Have a good 4th of July, everyone. Remember, Dynasty, it's like a disco ball. Keep spinning year-round, so join the club every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern right here with Club Fantasy. Have a good night. Like Joel said, enjoy.